The babysitter switched to Mandarin on her phone, and I understood every word she said about me. When I heard my babysitter say my daughter's name followed by the word sleeping pill in Mandarin, I stood frozen in my own hallway with a bag of groceries slipping out of my arms. Because 5 years of night classes I'd never told a single person about had just handed me the exact sentence that would end my family's sense of safety. Nobody in my life knew I spoke Mandarin. Not my husband, not my mother, not the woman standing 8 feet away from me with her back turned, phone pressed to her ear, completely unaware that the quiet, forgettable woman she worked for understood every syllable coming out of her mouth. My name is Ren, and I'd hired Lian Feng 9 months earlier through an agency my sister-in-law swore by. The kind that runs background checks and calls 3 references and makes you feel like you're doing everything right. Lian was 26, soft-spoken, always early, always had a snack ready for my daughter Odette before I even asked. She'd been a nanny for 2 other families in our neighborhood, both of whom raved about her when I called, though looking back, I never actually spoke to anyone who'd employed her for longer than a year. I'd studied Mandarin in secret for half a decade after a business trip to Shanghai left me humiliated in a meeting I couldn't follow. And I'd never once mentioned it to anyone, not because it was some grand secret, just because it never came up. The way half the things about a person never come up until the moment they matter more than anything else in the world. My husband Desmond traveled for work 3 weeks out of every month, which meant Leanne and I had built a strange, lopsided intimacy over those 9 months. The kind you build with someone who's alone in your house with your child more hours than you are. She knew where we kept the spare key. She knew Odette's nut allergy down to the exact dose of her EpiPen. She knew our alarm code, our garage code, the code to the safe in the closet where I kept my grandmother's jewelry, because I'd given it to her once during a work emergency and never bothered to change it after. I trusted her the way you trust anyone you've decided not to interrogate, which is to say completely, and for no reason beyond convenience. The first strange thing happened in February, small enough that I filed it away without a second thought. I came home early from a canceled meeting and found Lian on the back porch with her phone to her ear, speaking rapid Mandarin, pacing in tight circles the way people do when a conversation has teeth in it. She hung up the second she saw my car in the driveway, and by the time I walked in, she was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor building a block tower with Odette like nothing had happened at all. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone takes personal calls. Everyone has a life outside the 4 walls of someone else's house, and I had no right to feel unsettled by a woman speaking her own language on her own break. The second time was 3 weeks later, and this one stuck to me longer than it should have. I noticed a missed alert on our home security app, a motion trigger from 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday when Desmond was in Singapore, and I'd fallen asleep with my phone on silent. The footage showed Leon's car pulling into our driveway, sitting there with the headlights off for 11 minutes, then backing out again without her ever getting out of the vehicle. I asked her about it the next day, careful to keep my voice light, and she laughed and said she'd forgotten something in the house and decided it wasn't worth waking anyone up for. I told myself that was reasonable. I told myself a lot of things that spring that I no longer believe. By April, the pattern had become something I couldn't fully explain away no matter how hard I tried. Odette started coming down with what I assumed was a stomach bug every other Friday, sluggish and glassy-eyed by the time I got home from work, sleeping through dinner, sometimes sleeping straight through until the next morning, in a way that felt less like a toddler being tired, and more like something had been switched off inside her. Our pediatrician, Dr. A. Okafor Whitmore, 22 years in practice, ran a full panel when I brought it up at Odette's next checkup and found nothing wrong, no infection, no deficiency, nothing that would explain a 2-year-old sleeping 14 hours straight on a semi-regular basis. She told me to keep a log. I did. Every Friday for 6 weeks, the same pattern repeated itself, and every Friday, Leanne had been the one alone with her for the entire afternoon. I started noticing other things once I was actually looking instead of assuming. Small amounts of cash disappearing from the jar we kept for the cleaning service, never more than $60 at a time, never enough to be certain rather than paranoid. A bracelet of mine, cheap costume jewelry, gone from my dresser for 2 weeks before turning up again exactly where I'd left it, as if it had simply been borrowed and returned. My laptop, which I always left closed, found open twice in a month. The browser history cleared both times in a way that felt less like an accident and more like a habit somebody hadn't quite perfected yet. Each individual thing meant nothing. Together, they had started to form the outline of something I didn't want to look at directly. The Friday everything cracked open started like any other. I'd left work at 4:30 with a headache and a bag of groceries I hadn't planned on buying, some instinct pulling me toward the store instead of straight home, the kind of small detour that ends up rearranging your entire life without asking permission first. I let myself in through the side door instead of the front, quieter, out of habit more than intention, and that's the only reason I heard her at all before she heard me. Leanne was standing in the kitchen with her back to the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, speaking fast, low Mandarin into the receiver, while Odette's baby monitor sat face up on the counter beside her, the little green light glowing steady, which meant my daughter was upstairs, alone, unmonitored by anyone but a 2-inch speaker. "She's already asleep," Leanne was saying, and my whole body went still in the doorway. I gave her the drops again, half a dropper this time. She went down in 20 minutes. A pause, someone answering on the other end, a man's voice I couldn't quite make out. "No, the mother won't be back until 6. She never comes home early." Another pause. "I already sent the photos to Wei. He said the paperwork will be ready by next month if we keep the schedule the same." My grocery bag slid off my forearm and hit the floor with a soft, muffled thud, a jar of pasta sauce rolling out across the tile, and Leanne spun around so fast her phone nearly flew out of her hand. "Ren," she said, her face doing something complicated, surprise curdling fast into calculation. "I didn't hear you come in." I stood there staring at her, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth, every instinct screaming at me to demand answers immediately, and every ounce of self-preservation telling me that showing my hand right now, in this kitchen, alone with a woman who had apparently been drugging my daughter, was the single worst decision I could make. "Sorry," I said, forcing my voice into something flat and unbothered, though my hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them behind my back. "I dropped the bag. I'm clumsy today. Long week." I bent down slowly to gather the spilled groceries, using the extra seconds to breathe, to think, to keep my expression from betraying the fact that I had just heard, in perfect, unmistakable Mandarin, that my daughter had been drugged and photographed and that someone named Wei was preparing paperwork. I got through the next 90 minutes on autopilot, chatting with Leanne about nothing, paying her, thanking her, watching her car pull out of the driveway while every cell in my body wanted to physically block it from leaving. The second her taillights disappeared around the corner, I bolted upstairs to Odette's room. She was breathing, warm, curled on her side with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, and the relief that hit me was so violent I had to sit down on the floor beside her crib to keep from collapsing. I checked her pupils with the flashlight on my phone, watched them react sluggishly to the light, slower than they should have, and something in my chest went cold and permanent, in a way that would never fully thaw again. I didn't wake her to demand a hospital visit that night, mostly because Dr. Okafor Whitmore, whom I called at nearly 9 o'clock, and who picked up because I'd been her patient's mother for 2 years, and she recognized panic when she heard it, told me over the phone that unless Odette showed signs of respiratory distress, it was safer to let whatever was in her system metabolize naturally overnight and bring her in first thing in the morning for blood work, rather than risk an ER visit that would tip off whoever was involved before I had evidence to back up what I'd heard. "Document everything," she told me. "Times, symptoms, anything you can remember her saying. If this is what you think it is, you're going to need more than an overheard phone call." I sat awake in the rocking chair in Odette's room until sunrise, watching her chest rise and fall, replaying Leon's words over and over until I'd memorized every syllable. The next morning, blood work confirmed trace amounts of diphenhydramine in Odette's system, far above what any over-the-counter dose for a toddler should have produced, consistent with repeated administration over an extended period rather than a single accidental exposure. Dr. Okafor Whitmore's face, usually warm and easy, had gone carefully professional in a way that told me exactly how seriously she was taking this. "This isn't a mistake," she said. "This is someone deliberately sedating your daughter, and doing it regularly enough that her little body has adjusted to expect it. I have to file a report with Child Protective Services. Ren, it's mandatory, but I want you to hear it from me first so you're not blindsided." I nodded, numb, and asked her what came next. "Next," she said, "you call the police and you let them handle Leanne, not you. Whatever you heard on that phone call, whatever's going on, you cannot confront this alone." I hired a former federal investigator named Priya Anand Whitfield that same afternoon, a woman with 14 years of experience, 6 of them specifically working trafficking and exploitation cases before she went private, recommended to me by Dr. Okafor Whitmore's own attorney. Priya listened to my account of the phone call twice, had me write out every word I remembered as precisely as possible, and then asked a question that made the floor tilt under me. "You said she mentioned photos being sent to someone named Wei, and paperwork being ready by next month. Ren, I need you to think carefully. Has Leanne ever asked to take pictures of Odette? For anything at all? A project, a portfolio? Anything that seemed harmless at the time?" I sat with that question for a long, sick moment before the memory surfaced. 2 months earlier, Leanne had asked if she could take a few photos of Odette for what she called a family scrapbook project she was doing for a class. Sweet, candid shots of her playing, napping, eating breakfast, nothing that had seemed remotely alarming at the time. I'd said yes without thinking twice, the way you say yes to 100 small requests from someone you trust, and I had never once asked to see the photos afterward. Priya's expression didn't change, but something in the set of her shoulders did. I want to pull Leanne's digital footprint, she said. Social media, any cloud accounts we can legally trace, anything that connects her to a person named Wei. This might be nothing. It might also be something much larger than one bad babysitter. Detective Ronan Vasquez Ibarra caught the case 2 days later, 17 years with the department, the last 9 specifically assigned to a regional task force focused on child exploitation and trafficking rings operating across state lines. He came to our house himself, sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad and a recorder, and listened to me repeat the overheard conversation for what felt like the 10th time, asking me to slow down at certain phrases, to be absolutely certain of the words I'd heard. Half a dropper, he repeated, writing it down. And she said the mother never comes home early. That tells me this wasn't a one-time slip, this was a routine she'd built and was confident in. He asked whether Leanne knew I spoke Mandarin, and when I told him no, not a single person outside of this conversation knew, his expression shifted into something I can only describe as grim relief. That's actually the best thing you have going for you, he said. She has no idea her cover's blown. That buys us time to do this right instead of scaring her into destroying evidence. Over the following 10 days, Priya's investigation and the detective's parallel inquiry began peeling back layers of Lian Feng's life that bore almost no resemblance to the woman who'd been building block towers in my living room. Her real name, according to immigration records Detective Vasquez Ibarra was able to pull with a warrant, was not Lian Feng at all, but Meihui Zhang, operating under a fabricated identity with forged references that traced back to an agency whose owner, a man named Desmond Wei Cho, had already been under separate federal investigation for 11 months for running what agents suspected was a child trafficking operation disguised as a legitimate nanny placement service, specializing in placing operatives inside wealthy households to identify, photograph, and eventually help facilitate the disappearance of specific children matching buyer requests overseas. The photographs Leanne had taken under the guise of a scrapbook project had, according to data recovered from a cloud account Priya's team traced through a shared IP address, been forwarded to an encrypted messaging thread containing at least 6 other similar sets of photographs, each labeled with a child's approximate age, coloring, and what appeared to be a coded price range. Odette's folder was labeled with a dollar figure that made me physically sick when Detective Vasquez Ibarra showed it to me, flanked by 2 federal agents who'd joined the case once its scope became clear, Agent Priyanka Oduya Brennan, from the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit, and her partner Agent Soren Kalhoff, both of whom had spent the better part of a decade dismantling exactly this kind of operation. The sedation wasn't random, Agent Oduya Brennan explained to me during a briefing at their field office, sliding a folder labeled with an evidence tag across the table, the same weight of paper and procedure I'd only ever seen in courtroom dramas until it became the architecture of my own life. It served 2 purposes. It kept Odette compliant and quiet during the photography sessions, and it was likely also meant to habituate her system, so that when the actual transfer happened, whatever sedative was used to move her wouldn't trigger the kind of reaction that draws attention. This is a pattern we've documented in at least 4 other cases tied to this network over the past 2 years. I asked her, my voice barely functioning, how close we'd been to that transfer actually happening. She didn't sugarcoat it. Based on the timeline in the messages, and the reference to paperwork being ready next month, I'd estimate 3 to 5 weeks. The crisis peak arrived on a Wednesday morning that I will never be able to fully separate from the rest of my life. A before and after line drawn straight through the middle of everything. Detective Vasquez Ibarra called at 6:40 a.m. to tell me the task force had identified that Leon, or Meihui, was scheduled to meet with 2 other operatives from the network that same evening at a storage facility across town. A meeting agents believed was connected to finalizing logistics for at least 2 children's transfers, one of which they now had strong reason to believe was Odette's. They needed one more thing from me before they could move on the arrest with enough evidence to guarantee it would hold in court. They needed Leanne to show up for her regular Friday shift, unaware anything had changed, wearing a body camera I would help conceal, so agents could capture her handling Odette while making any incriminating statements on the record, ideally corroborating the drugging in real time. I had less than 48 hours to decide whether I could physically stand in my own kitchen and hand my daughter over to a woman I now knew had been drugging and photographing her for a buyer overseas, smile, say goodbye, and drive away as if nothing was wrong, trusting a team of agents parked 3 houses down to keep her safe in the gap between my leaving and their arrest. Desmond flew home the second I called him, landing at 11 p.m. Wednesday night, and the two of us sat at our kitchen table with Detective Vasquez Ibarra until nearly 2 a.m., going over every contingency, every abort signal, every worst-case scenario the agents could think to prepare us for. My hands didn't stop shaking the entire conversation. Neither did his. Friday morning arrived gray and too quiet. The kind of stillness that feels less like calm and more like the held breath before something breaks. I dressed Odette myself, fed her breakfast myself, and every ordinary motion felt like it belonged to someone else's hands. When Leanne arrived at 8 a.m., cheerful, carrying a small bag of snacks the way she always did, I hugged Odette goodbye at the door and told her I'd see her tonight, my voice miraculously steady, while every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab her and run. I drove 3 blocks, pulled into a church parking lot Detective Vasquez Ibarra had designated as the staging point, and sat in my car with Desmond's hand crushing mine, while an agent in the front seat monitored the feed from a laptop, the audio from the hidden camera I'd concealed inside a stuffed rabbit that morning crackling faintly through the speakers. For 6 hours, I listened to my daughter's babysitter narrate a normal day, snack time, a trip to the park, a nap that started at 1:15, and my whole body seized when Leanne's voice, low and businesslike, came through the feed again around 1:40, speaking Mandarin to someone who'd apparently arrived at the house, a man's voice responding in clipped, efficient tones. The transfer date moved up, the man said. Wei wants her ready by Sunday instead of next month. There's a buyer flying in early. Leanne's voice, without a shred of hesitation, replied, That's fine. I already have the second dose ready. She won't wake up for the handoff. I felt Desmond's grip on my hand go so tight it hurt, and the agent in the front seat was already reaching for his radio. We're moving now, Agent Oduya Brennan's voice crackled through the coordination channel, and within 90 seconds, 3 unmarked vehicles converged on my street, agents in tactical vests moving up the driveway while Desmond and I were held back at the staging point, the longest 4 minutes of my entire life passing in near total silence, except for the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Then Detective Vasquez Ibarra's voice came through, controlled but unmistakably relieved. She's secure. Odette's fine, she's awake, she's asking for her mom. We have Leon in custody, and the man in the house, we have him too. His name's Renji Wei Ostrander. He's the one who's been coordinating the buyer side of this network directly. I don't fully remember the drive back to the house. Only the moment Odette's small arms wrapped around my neck on the front lawn while agents moved in and out of my house with evidence bags and cameras. My daughter's weight against my chest, the only thing keeping me upright. The arrests that followed over the next 3 weeks dismantled a trafficking network that had been operating across 6 states for nearly 4 years, placing operatives like Leon, real name Meihui Zhang, into wealthy households under falsified references, identifying children through a deliberately slow, patient process of building trust before ever attempting anything, exactly as she had with us. Meihui was charged with child endangerment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and trafficking-related offenses carrying a potential sentence of up to 30 years, and under the weight of the recorded evidence, agreed to cooperate against the larger network in exchange for a reduced sentence. Testimony that ultimately led to the arrest of Renjia Wei Ostrander and 11 other individuals across the operation, including the agency owner whose business had provided cover for the entire scheme from the beginning. Agent Oduya Brennan told me during our final debrief that Odette's case, and specifically the audio I'd captured from that overheard kitchen conversation, became the linchpin that allowed federal prosecutors to connect the network's photography and sedation pattern to 3 other unsolved cases in neighboring states. Children who had already gone missing under circumstances that had never been fully explained until Meihui's cooperation filled in the gaps. You didn't just save your own daughter, she told me, her voice quieter than I'd heard it during any of our earlier meetings. The pattern you documented is going to close cases that have been open for 2 years. I didn't feel like a hero when she said it. I felt like someone who had gotten unbelievably narrowly lucky, and who would spend a long time learning to live with how close the alternative had come. Odette doesn't remember any of it. Not the drugging, not the agents, not the 6 hours I sat in a church parking lot listening to a stranger plan her disappearance in a language she didn't yet know I understood. She's 3.5 now, and the only lasting sign of that spring is a mild, watchful streak she's developed around new adults, something her new therapist, a child trauma specialist named Dr. Naledi Ose-Fournier, says is common even in children too young to consciously recall the event, the body keeping a kind of memory the mind hasn't caught up to yet. I go to therapy myself now too, twice a month, mostly to manage the particular flavor of hypervigilance that comes from having once trusted someone completely, and having that trust weaponized against my own child. Desmond changed his travel schedule permanently, cutting his trips down to 1 week a month instead of 3, and neither of us has ever fully explained to our families how close we came to losing her, partly because the details are still sealed under an ongoing case, and partly because some things are too heavy to hand to people who love you but weren't there in that parking lot. I still study Mandarin, more seriously now than ever, a language that started as a private embarrassment from a business trip and became, without my ever intending it, the single reason my daughter is asleep upstairs in her own bed tonight, instead of somewhere I can't let myself finish imagining. I never told Leanne I understood her. I never had to. The silence I kept that Friday afternoon in my kitchen was the only weapon I needed, and it worked exactly once, which turned out to be exactly enough.